Hey y'all, it's entry number 85 of this off-season series where we discuss a different player's fantasy value each day as a group. We are another day closer to the start of the 2022 NFL season. Each day we'll drop a name, go through some positives and some concerns of their fantasy profile, and then I'll give my personal opinion at the end. Today's discussion will be on Ja'Marr Chase, wide receiver, Cincinnati Bengals. We'll start with the positives with Ja'Marr Chase's fantasy profile. Historic rookie year. Ja'Marr Chase had one of the best rookie seasons by a wide receiver ever, where he put up 81 receptions on 128 targets for 1,455 receiving yards and 13 receiving touchdowns. His 1,455 receiving yards were the most by a rookie wide receiver in the Super Bowl era. Having a historic season as a rookie is extremely encouraging. And considering Chase is still so young, it's possible he takes another step forward in year 2. The next thing I really like about Ja'Marr Chase's fantasy profile is that he's got an elite quarterback. Ja'Marr Chase has one of the better quarterbacks in the league throwing him the ball, in Joe Burrow. During the 2021 season, Joe Burrow completed 366 passes on 520 passing attempts for 4,011 passing yards and 34 passing touchdowns in 16 games. By having a solid quarterback, Chase will have an easier time scoring fantasy points. The last thing I really like about Ja'Marr Chase's fantasy profile is his efficiency. In terms of efficiency, Ja'Marr Chase was phenomenal in his rookie year, as he ranked in the top 10 among wide receivers in yards per route with 2.71, the 8th best among wide receivers. Yards per target with 11.4, the 3rd best among wide receivers. Yards per reception with 18.0, the 2nd best among wide receivers. Yards per team passing attempt with 2.62, the 4th best among wide receivers. Fantasy points per route run with 0.57, the 6th best among wide receivers. And fantasy points per target with 2.38, the 4th best among wide receivers, according to Player Profiler. This ridiculous level of efficiency is great news if you're planning on rostering Chase, since it means that he can be effective even if he doesn't see a ton of targets. And if he does happen to get peppered with targets, he could finish as the WR1 overall in fantasy. Moving on to some of the concerns with Ja'Marr Chase's fantasy profile. T. Higgins may limit his workload. T. Higgins is more talented than most number 2 wide receivers, and it could be argued that this is more of a 1A and 1B type of situation than their current ADPs indicate. In fact, last year, T. Higgins actually had a higher target share, 17th highest among wide receivers with 24.7%, than Ja'Marr Chase, who was 22nd with 23.7%. WR target share, air yard share, and targets per route than Chase, according to an article on fantasy data by Scott Rainier. Considering Higgins allegedly played a majority of the season through a shoulder issue and still got more work than Chase in 2021, there's a real chance that we don't see Chase take his biggest step forward in terms of target share in year 2, as many fantasy players are currently hoping for. The next major concern I have with Ja'Marr Chase's fantasy profile is his drops. One of the most popular jokes during last season was about how Ja'Marr Chase was clearly a bust because of the reports that he was dropping so many passes in training camp and preseason. While Chase most definitely wasn't a bust, there was something to the drops reports. During the 2021 season, Chase had the most drops in the league with 11 and posted the highest drop rate percent of any player with over 70 targets, with 8.6% according to Pro Football Reference. While drops aren't the most valuable receiving stat to weigh from a fantasy perspective, it will be interesting to see if Chase can improve in this area going into year 2. The last major concern I have with Ja'Marr Chase's fantasy profile is, can he continue to have so many long receptions? This one is pretty picky, but Ja'Marr Chase had 8 receptions of 40 or more receiving yards in 2021 according to Pro Football Reference, with a majority occurring in the first 7 games of the season. As talented as he is, it's hard for any player to consistently get 40-plus yard receptions, and there's a chance that he gets a little more unlucky with them in 2022. Some additional thoughts on Ja'Marr Chase's fantasy profile. During the 2021 season, Ja'Marr Chase finished as the WR3 in standard, with 223.6 total fantasy points and 13.2 fantasy points per game. the WR5 and half PPR formats with 264.1 total fantasy points and 15.5 fantasy points per game, and the WR5 in full PPR formats with 304.6 total fantasy points and 17.9 fantasy points per game according to Fantasy Pros. In half PPR formats during the 2021 season, Ja'Marr Chase had 2 out of 17 games with 0 to 5 fantasy points, 3 out of 17 games with 5 to 10 fantasy points, 5 out of 17 games with 10 to 15 fantasy points, 2 out of 17 games with 15 to 20 fantasy points, 3 out of 17 games with 20 to 25 fantasy points, and 2 out of 17 games with over 25 fantasy points according to fantasy data, including a 50.1 point game against the Kansas City Chiefs in Week 17. Wide receiver friendly coaches. The Cincinnati Bengals head coach Zach Taylor and offensive coordinator Brian Callahan have historically utilized their wide receiver rooms more than the average play caller over the course of their careers. Ja'Marr Chase was perceived as the most talented wide receiver in the 2021 NFL draft class, going 5th overall in the 2021 NFL draft. College career. Chase showcased major big play ability in his college career, making 8 touchdown catches of 50 or more receiving yards in 2019. Joe Burrow and Ja'Marr Chase were teammates on the 2019 LSU Tigers team that was dominant offensively. During the 2019 season, Ja'Marr Chase caught 84 passes for 1,780 receiving yards and 20 receiving touchdowns over the course of 14 games. Personal opinion, Ja'Marr Chase is currently going off the board as WR3 about pick 8 overall on ESPN, and WR3 about pick 9 overall on Yahoo. The WR3, WR4 spot seems about right to me. WR3 spot for me in standard and a toss-up between him and Diggs in half PPR. I actually prefer Diggs over him in full PPR formats. He's an explosive wide receiver who is in a pretty great situation and should have a decent shot as finishing as the WR1 in 2022. For each of these entries, we will highlight a charitable cause or organization. I couldn't find a charity that Ja'Marr Chase has supported in the past, so here's a link to his teammate Joe Burrow's My Cause My Cleats in 2020 for the Foundation for Appalachian, Ohio. Here's a link to that organization below. And that's it for today's entry. If you enjoyed this entry, be sure to like and subscribe.